Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. The December air bit through Blake Carlson's jacket as he stepped out of the rental car 3 hours earlier than planned. The Chicago conference had wrapped early, and he'd caught the first flight home, eager to surprise his 6-year-old son Ethan before bedtime. The house lights blazed through every window, unusual for a Tuesday evening. Music thumped from inside, muffled but unmistakable. Blake's gut tightened as he noticed a small figure hunched against the oak tree in the front yard. The porch lights cast just enough glow to reveal Ethan, knees pulled to his chest, shivering in his thin Superman t-shirt and jeans. No coat, no gloves, no hat. In 20-degree weather, Blake's briefcase hit the frozen ground. He sprinted across the lawn, his dress, shoes sliding on patches of ice. Ethan, the boy's head jerked up, tears frozen on his cheeks. His lips had taken on a bluish tint. "Daddy," the word came out in a cloud of vapor, broken by chattering teeth. Blake scooped him up, shocked by how light his son felt, how cold his small body was. Ethan buried his face in Blake's neck, and Blake felt the trembling intensify, not just from cold, but from relief. "How long have you been out here, buddy?" "I don't know. Long time. Since it got dark." Blake glanced at his watch. 7:30. Sunset had been around 4:30. 3 hours. His son had been sitting in the snow for 3 hours. Through the front window, Blake could see the living room packed with people. Vera's family, all of them. Her parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. Balloons. Streamers. A massive cake on the dining table. Wine glasses raised in toasts. Laughter carrying through the walls. His wife's birthday party. Blake carried Ethan toward the front door, rubbing the boy's arms to generate warmth. Before he could reach for the handle, the door swung open. Eleanor Holland, Vera's mother, stood in the doorway, her face flushed from wine and warmth. Her smile faltered when she saw Blake. "Blake, you're home early." Not a greeting, an accusation. "Why is my son outside freezing?" Blake's voice came out level, controlled. The tone he'd learned in his 8 years as a prosecutor before switching to private practice. The tone that made witnesses nervous. Eleanor's chin lifted, her eyes hardening. "He's being punished." Blake stared at her. Ethan still clutched against his chest. The boy had stopped shivering, which Blake knew was worse, a sign of hypothermia setting in. Punished. He was disrespectful to Vera during party preparations. She sent him outside to think about his behavior. Eleanor stepped back inside, clearly expecting this explanation to suffice. We didn't want his tantrum to ruin the celebration. Blake stepped into the house, his eyes scanning the scene. 19 people by his quick count. The entire Holland clan. Vera's father, Dick, stood by the fireplace, his round face red, bellowing some story to Vera's brother Jorge and Uncle Maurice. Vera's sisters Carrie and Gretchen lounged on the sofa with their husbands, glasses of champagne in hand. The dining table groaned under plates of food, prime rib, roasted vegetables, shrimp cocktail, 3 different desserts. His son had been starving outside while they feasted. Vera appeared from the kitchen, her dark hair styled in elaborate curls, wearing a new dress Blake didn't recognize. Expensive. Her laughter died when she saw him. "Blake? What are you doing here?" "I live here." Blake looked down at Ethan, whose small body had gone limp in his arms, exhausted. "When were you planning to let our son back inside?" The room quieted. The music from the speaker system continued, but conversations stopped mid-sentence. Dick Holland turned from the fireplace, his jovial expression fading. Vera's jaw tightened. "Mother told you. He was being punished." "For what?" "He spilled juice on my dress while I was getting ready. Then he had the nerve to talk back when I scolded him." Vera's voice rose, plain to her audience. "He needs to learn there are consequences for her. He's 6 years old." "Exactly. Old enough to know better." Blake felt Ethan's small hand grip his shirt. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. Had she always been this cold? Or had he been too busy building his career to notice? He walked through the living room, toward the stairs, still carrying Ethan. Eleanor moved to block his path. "Where are you going?" "The party isn't over." Blake stopped. The entire room watched him now. Dick Holland's face had paled slightly, as if some instinct warned him something was about to shift. Blake looked at Eleanor, then at Vera, then at the whole assembled Holland family with their full plates and full glasses and full stomachs, and said 4 words. "We're getting a divorce." The music seemed to amplify in the silence that followed. Someone's champagne glass slipped, shattering on the hardwood floor. Vera's face went white, then red. "You can't," she started. "I just did." Blake adjusted Ethan in his arms and headed upstairs. Behind him, chaos erupted. Vera's voice shrill with fury. Eleanor demanding he come back. Dick trying to assert some patriarchal authority Blake had never granted him. Blake didn't look back. In Ethan's room, Blake ran a warm bath and gradually brought his son's core temperature back up. Ethan didn't speak, just clung to him, and Blake felt something inside his chest crack and reform into something harder. He dressed Ethan in warm pajamas, made him hot chocolate, and sat with him until the boy fell asleep clutching his favorite stuffed bear. Downstairs, the party had dissolved into angry voices. Blake heard the front door slam multiple times as the Holland family departed. He packed 2 suitcases, one for himself, one for Ethan, working methodically while his mind calculated options, strategies, next moves. Vera appeared in the bedroom doorway, her makeup smeared from crying. "You humiliated me in front of my entire family." Blake folded one of Ethan's shirts. "You left our son outside in the snow for 3 hours. He needed to learn. He needed a coat. Food. Basic human decency." Blake zipped Ethan's suitcase. "Things apparently in short supply in this house." "Where are you going?" "Hotel tonight. My own place tomorrow." Blake faced her. "My attorney will contact you about custody arrangements." Vera's tears vanished, replaced by calculating fury. "You won't get custody. I'm his mother. You're the woman who left him outside to freeze while you ate cake. That's not how I'll tell it." Vera crossed her arms. "You're never here, Blake. Always working, always traveling. I'm the one who's been raising him." "Into what? Your family's punching bag." Blake picked up both suitcases. "We're done, Vera. This marriage is over. My father will destroy you. He has connections, resources. Dick Holland owns 3 car dealerships and thinks that makes him a power player." Blake's voice remained calm, factual. "I've prosecuted organized crime figures. I've negotiated settlements in federal court. Your father doesn't frighten me." He walked past her, collected Ethan from his bed, the boy stirring but not waking, and left the house that had never really been a home. The next morning, Blake checked them into an extended stay hotel suite. Ethan seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had lifted. They ordered room service pancakes and watched cartoons, and Blake saw his son smile for the first time in what felt like months. At 9 a.m., Blake made 3 phone calls. The first was to Marcus Webb, the best divorce attorney in Chicago. They'd gone to law school together, and Marcus owed him a favor from a referral that had netted a substantial settlement. The second was to his firm's managing partner, requesting an immediate leave of absence. The third was to an old friend from his prosecutor days, now working in the FBI's white-collar crime division. By 10 a.m., Blake had an attorney, a plan, and the beginning of something the Holland family would never see coming. His phone buzzed with texts from Vera, then voicemails. By lunch, he had 12 messages. He deleted them all without listening. Blake spent the afternoon at Marcus's office, laying out everything he knew about Vera and her family. Marcus listened, took notes, and when Blake finished, leaned back in his leather chair. "You want full custody. I want my son safe. The incident last night helps, but we need more. Patterns of behavior. Documentation." Marcus tapped his pen against his legal pad. "And you need to be squeaky clean. They'll come at you hard. I am clean. I know. But they'll try to manufacture dirt. Be prepared for lies, Blake. Accusations. The Holland family doesn't strike me as the type to accept defeat gracefully." Blake thought about Dick Holland's pale face when he'd announced the divorce. Eleanor's shocked fury. Vera's threats. They won't. Which is why I need to be 3 steps ahead of them. Marcus smiled slowly. "I've seen that look before. Usually right before you decimated a hostile witness on cross-examination. What are you planning? Research. Just research." Blake stood, extending his hand. File the papers tomorrow. I want this moving fast. That evening, after Ethan was asleep, Blake opened his laptop and began to dig. Dick Holland's dealerships were successful, profitable, with locations across the Chicago suburbs. Blake started with public records, business filings, tax liens, property records. Nothing unusual appeared on the surface, but Blake had learned during his prosecutor years that the surface was rarely where the truth lived. He moved to social media, news archives, business journals. Dick Holland portrayed himself as a pillar of the community. Charity golf tournaments, sponsorship of little league teams, quotes in local business features about his family values, and commitment to honest dealings. Blake's instincts prickled. In his experience, people who loudly proclaimed their honesty were often compensating for something. He dug deeper, pulling archived articles from 10 years ago, 15, 20. And there it was. A small mention in a business journal about Dick Holland's first dealership, how he'd acquired it from his former employer under disputed circumstances. The article was vague, but it referenced a lawsuit that had been settled privately. Blake tracked down the case number, requested the sealed documents through his legal connections. They'd arrive in a few days. His phone rang. Vera. He let go to voicemail. When a notification appeared, he played it. Blake, please, can we just talk about this? You're being rash. Dad says you're just stressed from work, that we can work this out. Call me back. Please. The conciliatory tone lasted for 3 more voicemails. The 4th one shifted. You son of a bitch. You can't just walk out on me. On us. After everything my family has done for you. Blake deleted it mid-sentence. A text from Marcus appeared. Papers filed. She's been served. Expect fireworks. Blake texted back. Let them come. The next day, the fireworks arrived in the form of Dick Holland himself, appearing at Blake's office building lobby. Blake's assistant called up, nervous. Mr. Carlson, there's a, very upset gentleman here to see you. Tell security I don't have any appointments this morning. He's quite insistent. He says he's your father-in-law. Blake considered. Meeting now or meeting later wouldn't change anything, and at least here he'd have witnesses. Send him up. Dick Holland strode into Blake's office like he owned it, his face red, his expensive suit straining across his gut. You need to drop this divorce nonsense immediately. Blake didn't stand, didn't offer a handshake. Close the door, Dick. Don't tell me what to do in your own office, you ungrateful. Close the door or leave. Those are your options. Dick's jaw worked, but he closed the door. He remained standing, attempting to use his height advantage. Blake let him. Intimidation tactics were old hat. Vera is devastated. Dick began. Eleanor is beside herself. You made a scene, embarrassed us in front of family. You left my son outside in the snow for 3 hours. He was being disciplined. He's 6. That's exactly the problem. Dick's voice rose. You're too soft on the boy. Vera and Eleanor were trying to teach him respect, boundaries, things he clearly isn't learning from you. Blake leaned back in his chair, studying Dick Holland with the same analytical detachment he'd once used to assess criminal defendants. Is that what you taught your children? Respect through cruelty. We taught them strength, character. Look at Vera, successful, beautiful from a good family. She could have married anyone. She chose you, a nobody from nowhere with a cheap law degree. There it was, the mask slipping. Blake had suspected the Holland family had always looked down on him, but Vera had been good at hiding it. Or maybe he'd been too focused on building his career to notice. Northwestern law isn't cheap, Blake said mildly. On scholarship, everyone knows. Dick leaned forward, palms on Blake's desk. You married up, son. Way up. And you don't seem to appreciate what that means. The connections, the opportunities my family has provided. Name one. Dick blinked. What? Name one connection or opportunity your family has provided me. Specifically, well, the respect, the association with the Holland name. I built my career myself. I've never used your name for anything. Blake stood now, coming around the desk. And I never will. We're done here, Dick. My attorney will handle all communication from here on out. Dick's face purpled. You're making a massive mistake. I have lawyers too. Better lawyers. I will bury you in court, take everything you have, and make sure you never see that boy again. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Dick headed for the door, then turned back. Drop the divorce, come back home, apologize to Vera and Eleanor, and we'll forget this ever happened. You have 24 hours. After Dick left, Blake's assistant appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide. Should I call security? It's fine, Rachel. But log the visit, time, date, what was said. Everything you heard. He was pretty loud. I heard most of it. She hesitated. Mr. Carlson, are you okay? Blake smiled, something cold and calculated forming in his mind. I'm excellent. Rachel, clear my calendar for the rest of the week. I have research to do. Over the next 3 days, Blake barely slept. He picked up Ethan from the hotel daycare in the evenings, made sure the boy had dinner and homework help, then worked late into the night while Ethan slept. The sealed lawsuit documents arrived. Blake read them twice, taking detailed notes. 20 years ago, Dick Holland had worked as a sales manager at Morrison Motors, a family-owned dealership. When a Morrison patriarch died, Dick had somehow acquired the business for significantly less than market value. The Morrison children had sued, alleging fraud, coercion, and manipulation of their grieving mother. The suit had been settled out of court with NDAs all around. Blake cross-referenced the timeline with property records. 3 months after acquiring Morrison Motors, Dick had purchased a vacation home in Lake Geneva. 6 months later, he bought out 2 competing dealerships. The money had come from somewhere. Blake's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Hearing scheduled for next week. Temporary custody arrangements. They're bringing big guns. Harold Patterson representing Vera. Blake knew Patterson. Expensive, ruthless, with a reputation for character assassination. This confirmed Dick's threat wasn't empty. Another text from Marcus. Patterson already filing motions. Claiming you're unstable. That walking out was abandonment. That your work schedule makes you unfit. They're painting Vera as the victim. Blake called Marcus back. How bad? They're going for the throat. Patterson submitted a declaration from Vera claiming you've been emotionally distant for years, that Ethan is afraid of you, that the divorce announcement was violent and traumatic. All lies. I know, but we need to counter it. Do you have anyone who can testify to your relationship with Ethan? Blake thought. His colleagues knew him professionally, but his personal life had been largely separate. Vera had always handled Ethan's school functions, playdates, doctor's appointments. By design, Blake now realized, she'd systematically isolated him from their son's daily life while he worked 60-hour weeks. His teacher, Blake said, Mrs. Chun, she knows I attend parent conferences, that I help with homework when I'm home. That's a start. I'll need more. What about friends, family? Blake's parents had died in a car accident when he was in college. No siblings. His friends were mostly from law school, scattered across the country now, consumed by their own careers and families. He'd been alone. Vera had made sure of it. I'll find people, Blake said, but his mind was already working on a different angle. If they wanted to destroy his character, he needed to make sure theirs was destroyed first. After hanging up, Blake returned to his research. He pulled records on Eleanor Holland, on Vera's siblings Jorge and Carrie and Gretchen. He looked into business licenses, social media, anywhere a crack might appear. Eleanor's Instagram was a carefully curated gallery of family perfection. Photos of grandchildren, holiday gatherings, inspirational quotes about motherhood. Blake scrolled back years, looking for inconsistencies. There, 3 years ago, a photo of a family dinner. 20 people around a long table, smiling for the camera. Blake zoomed in on the faces. Ethan was barely visible at the far end, alone, while the other grandchildren clustered near Eleanor. The caption read, "Blessed with such a beautiful family." Blake saved the photo. He found more. Ethan consistently pushed to the edges, forgotten, excluded. In one Christmas photo, he wasn't even in the frame. Blake could see just the edge of his sleeve cut off by the camera's boundary. A pattern, not of punishment for specific behaviors, but of systematic exclusion. Blake's phone exploded with notifications. Voicemails, texts, emails, all from Vera, her parents, her siblings. The count climbed. 15, 20, 30. He didn't respond to any of them. On the 4th day, Blake received a package via courier. Inside was a stack of documents, affidavits from Holland family members attesting to Blake's failures as a father and husband. According to the statements, Blake was neglectful, emotionally abusive, cold toward Ethan, more interested in his career than his family. Carrie Holland's affidavit claimed she'd personally witnessed Blake yelling at Ethan for spilling milk. Jorge Holland swore Blake had called Ethan worthless during a family dinner. Eleanor's statement painted Blake as a controlling husband who isolated Vera from her family and refused to participate in family functions. All lies. Every single word. Blake set the documents aside and made another call, this time to a private investigator he'd worked with during his prosecutor days. "Frank, I need everything you can find on the Holland family. And I mean everything. How deep do you want me to go?" Ocean floor. That evening, Blake took Ethan to Navy Pier. They rode the Ferris wheel and ate hot dogs and watched street performers. Ethan laughed, really laughed, and Blake felt the rightness of his decision settle into his bones. "Daddy," Ethan said as they walked back to the car. "Are we going back to the house?" "No, buddy. We're getting our own place." "Good." Ethan's small hand squeezed Blake's. "I like it better with just us." "What about Mom? Do you want to see her?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes she's nice, but sometimes she's really mean. And Grandma Eleanor is always mean." "Mean how?" "She says I'm too loud, that I'm clumsy, that I'm not as good as the other grandkids." Ethan kicked at a pebble. "She says I'm like you. Not really a Holland." Blake stopped walking. "When did she say that?" "Lots of times. Mom doesn't say anything when Grandma says it." Ethan looked up at him. "Is it bad to be like you?" Blake knelt down, a level with his son. "Being like me is the best thing you could be. And anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong." That night, Blake's resolve hardened into something unbreakable. The Hollands wanted to destroy him? They'd chosen the wrong target. He worked until 3 a.m., compiling evidence, building his case. Not just for the divorce, but for something larger. Something that would expose exactly who the Holland family really was. Frank, the investigator, called the next morning. "Blake, you're going to want to hear this. Dick Holland's dealerships have some interesting financial patterns. Tell me, customer complaints that never get resolved. Trade-in values that mysteriously drop after the car is on the lot. Service charges for work never performed. It's all carefully hidden, but once you know what to look for." Frank paused. "There's more. I found 3 former employees willing to talk. They all tell the same story. Dick runs a tight ship, but it's built on deception. Can they testify? 2 of them will, if subpoenaed. The third is scared of retaliation." Blake's mind raced. Financial fraud at the dealerships could open up criminal investigation possibilities. But he needed something stronger, something that would crack the family's perfect facade wide open. "Keep digging," Blake said. "Follow the money. Everything Dick touches. Already on it. I'm also looking into Eleanor. Her charity work, her social clubs. You'd be surprised what people say when they think nobody's listening." The custody hearing arrived. Blake walked into the courtroom with Marcus, his posture confident, his expression calm. Across the aisle, Vera sat with Harold Patterson and her entire family. Dick, Eleanor, Jorge, Carrie, Gretchen, and Maurice, all dressed immaculately, presenting a united front. Judge Morrison, no relation to the dealership family, Blake had checked, reviewed the preliminary motions. "This is just for temporary custody arrangements until the divorce is finalized." "Mr. Patterson." Patterson stood, every inch the high-priced attorney. "Your Honor, my client is deeply concerned about the welfare of the minor child, Ethan Carlson. The defendant abandoned both his wife and child without warning, removing the child from his home in the middle of the night. I have documentation," Marcus interrupted smoothly, "of why my client removed his son from that home. Photos of Ethan outside in 20-degree weather without appropriate clothing, medical records showing early-stage hypothermia, testimony from the hotel staff who witnessed the child's condition upon arrival." Patterson didn't miss a beat. A disciplinary action that was misrepresented by the defendant. The child was outside for minutes, not hours, and was properly supervised. "By whom?" Marcus asked. "Everyone in the house was at a party." The judge held up a hand. "I'll hear for both parties." Mrs. Carlson approached the witness stand. Vera took the stand, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She painted a picture of Blake as an absent father, consumed by work, barely involved in Ethan's life. She claimed the punishment had been a brief timeout that Blake exaggerated. She wept as she described her shock and humiliation when Blake announced their divorce in front of her family. She was convincing. Blake had to give her that. Then Marcus began his cross-examination. Mrs. Carlson, how long was Ethan outside? Just a few minutes. You're sure about that? Yes. Marcus pulled out a photo, entered it as evidence. This is a photo from your sister's Instagram story, posted at 7:47 p.m. You can see through the window that Ethan is outside in the snow. What time was he allowed back in? Vera's face paled. I don't know the exact time. Your husband arrived home at 7:30 p.m. and found Ethan outside. Your mother told him Ethan had been there since dark, approximately 4:30 p.m. That's 3 hours, Mrs. Carlson. That's not. Is your mother lying? No, but did you check on Ethan during those 3 hours? Silence. Mrs. Carlson, he was being punished. Marcus let that hang in the air. Judge Morrison's expression had shifted from neutral to concerned. What was he being punished for? Marcus asked. He spilled juice on my dress. And the appropriate punishment for a 6-year-old accidentally spilling juice is 3 hours in the snow without a coat. I didn't mean it wasn't supposed to be that long. Marcus presented more evidence. The Instagram photos showing Ethan excluded from family gatherings. Emails from Ethan's teacher expressing concern about the boy's withdrawn behavior. A statement from the hotel manager about Ethan's condition that night. By the time Marcus finished, Vera was in tears and not the calculated kind. Judge Morrison called a recess, then returned with her decision. Temporary custody will be granted to Mr. Carlson, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Carlson pending further evaluation. I'm also ordering a home study and psychological evaluation for both parents. Dick Holland shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You're taking a child from his mother based on. Mr. Holland, sit down or I'll have you removed. Judge Morrison's voice could have frozen lava. This court does not take child endangerment lightly. Outside the courtroom, Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Found something big. Call me ASAP. Blake stepped away from Marcus, dialing Frank. What have you got? Dick Holland's financing deals. He's been running a scheme for years. Falsifying credit applications, inflating trade-in values on paper while lowballing customers in reality. Kickbacks from lenders. It's fraud, Blake. Serious fraud. Can you prove it? I've got emails, text messages, and 3 former employees who kept copies of altered documents. They were scared to come forward before, but if you guarantee them protection, Blake's pulse quickened. Send everything to me. And Frank, start looking into Eleanor's charity. I want to know where that money actually goes. The voicemails kept coming. By day 7, Blake had 38 messages from various Holland family members. Threats, pleas, accusations, promises. He listened to none of them. Instead, he compiled his evidence into a comprehensive file. The financial fraud at Dick's dealerships. The pattern of psychological abuse toward Ethan. The false affidavits. Everything. Then he made a call to his old FBI contact. Tom, remember when you said you owed me a favor? Blake Carlson. Long time. What do you need? How would you like to make a case against a car dealership empire running a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme? Tom was quiet for a moment. I'm listening. Blake laid it all out. Tom asked questions, took notes, and finally said, send me everything you have. If it's as solid as you say, we can move on this. How long? With financial crimes? We'll need to build it carefully. Few months minimum. I can wait. Blake had learned patience during his prosecutor years. Good cases took time. But Blake had one more card to play. He called Eleanor's charity organization, posing as a potential donor. The director was effusive about their work, about Mrs. Holland's dedication. Blake asked detailed questions about fund allocation, program costs, administrative expenses. The numbers didn't add up. He referred the matter to Tom as well. While you're investigating Dick, you might want to look into his wife's nonprofit. I think you'll find interesting discrepancies. Blake picked up Ethan from his after-school program and took him apartment hunting. They found a 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park with a balcony and a view of the park. Ethan chose his own room, his own paint color blue like the ocean. "Can we get a dog?" Ethan asked. Blake had never been a dog person, but looking at his son's hopeful face, he found himself saying, "Yeah, buddy, we can get a dog." They moved in the next week. Blake enrolled Ethan in a new school closer to the apartment, somewhere the Holland family couldn't accidentally run into them. He hired a nanny for after school, interviewed her thoroughly, checked references twice. Slowly, Ethan began to bloom. His smiles came easier. His nightmares, Blake hadn't realized he'd been having them, stopped. He made friends at the new school. Blake adjusted his work schedule, taking on cases he could manage from home when possible, delegating more to his associates. He made it to school pickups, helped with homework, cooked dinners that weren't takeout. For the first time in years, Blake felt like he was actually living instead of just surviving. The Holland family, meanwhile, was imploding. Patterson withdrew from Vera's case after 2 months. Professional conflict, he claimed, but Blake suspected the man had seen the evidence Marcus had compiled and knew a losing battle when he saw one. Vera's second attorney lasted 3 weeks before also withdrawing. The FBI investigation became public knowledge when agents showed up at Dick Holland's main dealership with a search warrant. Local news covered extensively. Prominent businessman under federal investigation. Dick's lawyers issued statements denying everything, but the damage to his reputation was done. Sales at the dealerships plummeted. 3 of his top salespeople quit. Eleanor's charity came under scrutiny as well. An audit revealed that 70% of donations had been funneled into administrative costs, which seemed to include Eleanor's personal shopping habits and spa memberships. The IRS got involved. Blake's phone still buzzed with messages from the Holland family, but now they were desperate instead of threatening. Vera begged him to help her father, to call off the investigation, to make it all stop. Blake deleted each message without responding. Marcus called with updates on the divorce proceedings. Vera's willing to settle. She knows she won't get custody at this point. What's she offering? Supervised visitation twice a month. No alimony. She keeps the house and her car. You keep everything else. No, Blake. I want full custody with her having the right to request visitation through the court. I want the house sold and proceeds split. And I want all those affidavits recanted in writing, with acknowledgement that they were false. Marcus was quiet. That's aggressive. They try to destroy me, Marcus. Try to take my son. I'm being generous by not pursuing perjury charges. Let me see what I can do. 3 days later, Vera agreed to everything. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Blake had walked out of the house. Judge Morrison granted him full custody, citing the evidence of neglect and the child's clear preference for living with his father. Vera got visitation once a month, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. At the final hearing, Vera looked like a shadow of herself. Her expensive clothes hung loose. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. She barely made eye contact with Blake. Eleanor and Dick didn't attend. They had their own legal problems to deal with. After the hearing, Blake took Ethan to Navy Pier again. It had become their tradition, a celebration of freedom. Is it really over? Ethan asked, his hand in Blake's. Yeah, buddy. It's really over. Good. Ethan smiled up at him. I like our life now. Blake looked at his son, happy, healthy, thriving, and felt a satisfaction deeper than any courtroom victory he'd ever achieved. The next week, Tom called. We're moving forward with charges against Dick Holland. Wire fraud, bank fraud, falsifying documents. If convicted, he's looking at significant prison time. And Eleanor, tax evasion, fraud, embezzlement from her nonprofit. She'll likely get prison time too, though probably less than Dick. Blake thanked Tom and hung up. He felt no satisfaction from the Hollands' downfall, only relief that they could never hurt his son again. 6 months later, Blake stood in the courtroom as Dick Holland was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Eleanor got 4 years. Their business empire collapsed. The dealerships went bankrupt. The vacation house was seized by the IRS. Jorge, Carrie, and Gretchen, complicit in their parents' schemes to varying degrees, faced their own legal consequences. The family that had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, had destroyed itself through its own corruption and cruelty. Vera moved to Arizona with whatever money she had left. She sent Ethan birthday cards but never called. Eventually, the cards stopped coming too. Blake didn't celebrate the Holland's destruction. He simply moved forward with his life, focused on being the father Ethan deserved. A year after the divorce, Blake and Ethan adopted a rescue dog, a goofy golden retriever named Max. They went to baseball games and museums and took weekend trips to Wisconsin. Blake scaled back his caseload permanently, choosing quality of life over career advancement. He dated occasionally, but never seriously. Ethan was his priority. On the anniversary of that terrible night, the night Blake had found Ethan in the snow, Blake took his son to their favorite restaurant. Over dessert, Ethan said, "Dad, I'm glad you came home early that night." Blake reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. "Me too, buddy. Me too." The Holland family had tried to break him, to take everything he valued. Instead, they'd given him the push he needed to see clearly, to act decisively, to choose his son over everything else. And in the end, their own corruption had been their downfall. Blake hadn't destroyed them. They destroyed themselves. He'd simply made sure the truth came to light. As they left the restaurant, Ethan chattering about his upcoming soccer game and Max's latest antics, Blake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.